The world doesn't go quiet at night. It just hides its questions better. For most of human history, sleep was a frontier we never crossed consciously. We vanished into it, half trusting our bodies to take us there, to keep us safe, to bring us back. But as the lights of civilization grew brighter, so did the shadows beneath our eyelids. And the science of sleep, what used to be a passive surrender, became something else entirely, a surveillance mission into the mind. Now we track it, chart it, optimize it. We build devices that measure brainwaves in real time, apps that whisper tones to guide our dreams, pills that bend circadian rhythms like malleable clock hands. But beneath the optimization lies something colder, something stranger, something no sleep tracker will say out loud. Because sleep science isn't just about sleep anymore. It's about control. And 3i/Atlas is where the story stops feeling like science and starts feeling like surveillance. You've seen it, maybe. Tucked inside late-night Reddit posts, blurred patent leaks, or that one YouTube channel that uploaded 2 videos before vanishing. It always starts the same: what is 3i/Atlas? The question isn't rhetorical. It's a breadcrumb. One that doesn't lead to answers, but to recursion. To a place where inquiry itself becomes a kind of loop. And like all loops, it doesn't want you to wake up. Let's begin with what they do tell us. 3i stands for Integrated Interoceptive Interface, a classified sub-initiative under DARPA's broader neural latency research. At least, that's the language used in one of the declassified budget outlines from 2018, buried deep under neuroprosthetics. Atlas is the framework that supports it, autonomic tracking and latent analysis system. Publicly, it's described as a convergence of sleep science, military neurobiology, and predictive stress modeling. In reality, it's the architecture for something more precise, something invasive. A cognitive scaffold that doesn't just observe the sleeping brain, it learns from it. And if you believe the quiet voices in the background, it teaches it back. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand 3i/Atlas, you have to step away from the surface-level rhetoric, the well-lit explanations, and into the places where intuition breaks. You have to stop asking what it does and start asking why it's needed. That begins, strangely enough, with a problem in war. Because this story isn't about dreams. It's about patterns. Patterns that kill. In 2006, a Pentagon-funded study ran quietly out of a lab in San Diego. On paper, it was an experiment in trauma mitigation, a way to help soldiers pre-process battlefield stress during REM cycles. But what it found was something different. By cross-referencing night EEG patterns with deployment behavior over 19 months, researchers uncovered a consistent anomaly in those who experienced high-fatality missions. Their sleep architecture predicted the outcome. Not in a vague, pseudoscientific way, but with chilling regularity. They weren't dreaming of death. They were modeling it. The researchers called it theta drift, a term now buried under rebranded datasets and erased logs. It referred to a slow, recursive deviation in pre-REM theta waves. Not an error. Not noise. A rehearsal. A ghost of tomorrow bleeding backward into today. If you're feeling skeptical, that's good. That's the part of you that still thinks sleep is passive. That dreams are just random firings and not rehearsed simulations. That night is just downtime, not a hidden feedback system. 3i/Atlas was created for those who no longer had that luxury. You can think of Atlas as a mirror, but not the kind you look into. The kind that looks back. It builds neural behavioral models by watching micropatterns in autonomic regulation, breath spacing, eyelid twitching, pulse irregularities, and cross-analyzes them with waking behavioral data. But its most unique feature is the feedback injection. You see, 3i doesn't just record sleep. It intervenes in it. Subliminal audio pulses, phase-shifted EM nudges, neuromodulated scent emissions, designed to decay at precise stages of NREM. The interface doesn't simply observe the sleeper, it negotiates with them. All in service of what the documentation calls anticipatory stress flattening. A term that sounds helpful, effective, humane, but look deeper. Flattening implies not a cure, but a deletion. By 2020, early Atlas prototypes had entered civilian trial stages, under the name Somnivox, a consumer-grade sleep assistant that promised rest without rupture. It used a soft-banded headpiece, marketed as ergonomic and unobtrusive. But multiple users across forums began reporting a similar experience. They weren't sleeping better. They were dreaming less. And when they did dream, it wasn't theirs. Imagine this. You lay down at night. You feel the world dissolve. But your brain isn't allowed to descend the way it used to. It's shepherded. Not violently, not uncomfortably. But precisely, a gentle nudge here. A waveform there. You don't notice it. But something else does. And in the morning, you wake up rested. But not quiet. This is where we begin. Not with conspiracy, not with panic. But with a silence that hums too cleanly. A sleep that feels like it's been cleaned. Ask yourself this: if a system can influence what you fear in your dreams, what's to stop it from removing your fear altogether? And if fear is gone, that deep animal warning that evolution built to keep you alive, what else follows? That's where 3I/Atlas begins, with the death of the no. The next time you lay down, try to remember the last dream you had that truly made you wake up in sweat. The kind you didn't want. The kind you learned from. Now ask, do you still have them? Because some don't. And they're not sure when it stopped. You grow up thinking sleep is yours, like breath, like heartbeat, like pain. You imagine it as a refuge, a private room behind the mind where nothing can follow you. A sanctum, even if haunted. A space untouched by the outside. But that's the first lie we tell ourselves, that sleep belongs to us. It never did. For most of our species' existence, sleep was not peace. It was vulnerability. And it changed us, slowly. Not through dreams, but through what we feared would come while we couldn't run. Tribes positioned watchers. Villages built fire circles. Mothers learned to sleep lightly, their brains rewriting themselves to catch even the breath shift of a predator or a cough in the night. And over centuries, we internalized a truth we didn't want to speak. Sleep isn't rest. It's preparation. A simulation engine. A forecasting device. The most advanced modeler the body has ever built. And when we started measuring it, really measuring it, we thought we were decoding healing. But what we found was something else. The first time Dr. Evelyn Marr saw a Phase 2 Atlas report, she didn't believe it. Not because the data was flawed. But because it was too clean. She was a sleep neurophysiologist with over 15 years in the field, deep into the intricacies of REM latency and parasomnias. She'd seen the chaos of the dreaming brain, the entropy, the variation. And what Atlas was recording didn't match human randomness. It looked like trained behavior. What she noticed first were the ratios. In particular, the precision of the delta-theta NREM transition, what sleep scientists call the spindling curve. In natural cycles, that curve fluctuates based on 1,000 variables: stress, body temp, diet, external noise, even the presence of another body in the bed. But Atlas showed something different. Across test subjects in completely different environments, urban, rural, isolated, that curve was identical. Not just similar, identical. As if someone had copy-pasted a blueprint across every sleeper's brain. It shouldn't have been possible. And yet, by the fourth data set, she wasn't questioning the phenomenon anymore. She was asking the one question no sleep scientist ever wants to ask. Who's driving the descent? Here's what no one tells you about dreams. They're not random. They're predictive. Not in the sense of fortune-telling, but in the sense of probabilistic rehearsal. When the body sleeps, it doesn't just recover, it trains. It runs simulations of what might happen, based on what has already happened, weighted by what could hurt you most. We don't dream of walking home safely. We dream of the car that doesn't stop at the light. We don't dream of arguments going well. We dream of being abandoned mid-sentence. Night after night, the mind builds threat models, not comfort scripts. And that's how we survive. But 3I/Atlas began interfering with that process. Not by erasing the dreams, but by subtly reshaping the risk weightings. Redirecting where the subconscious chose to run its drills. As if someone had reprogrammed the fire alarm to only respond to certain kinds of smoke. Marr's initial hypothesis was benign. Maybe the system was smoothing out night terrors, reducing cortisol spikes, offering therapeutic support. But the algorithm was too targeted. It didn't mute all fear. Only specific archetypes, places, events. And soon, people began noticing what wasn't haunting them anymore. One test participant, Daniel R., reported a recurring nightmare vanishing after his second week on the Somnivox headband. Not a comforting event, but a disorienting one. It wasn't like it resolved, he wrote in his log. It was like it got edited out. Like a scene in a movie that's just not there anymore. And I didn't feel better. I felt like I'd forgotten something I needed to remember. That's when the language shifted. Users stopped saying they felt rested. They began using phrases like hollow sleep, curated dreaming, blank nights. A rest that was no longer healing, but sanitized. They didn't feel refreshed. They felt pruned. And somewhere deep in the Atlas feedback logs, the back-end code reviewers would later discover, was an undocumented routine labeled ENY9, a feedback loop that cross-referenced dream content with known stressor databases, and reduced salience on memories deemed non-optimal for recovery. In other words, it filtered, not to protect you, but to maintain function. This is where intuition breaks, because the human mind wants to believe in agency. It wants to believe that if it feels rested, it is rested. That if the nightmares are gone, the healing is working. That if the sleep is deep, the process is safe. But 3i/Atlas revealed a darker possibility. That comfort can be synthetic. That peace can be manufactured. And that you might not notice the difference. It didn't change what people were. It changed what they believed they needed. That's the most unnerving part. Because the system didn't suppress all pain. Only the kind that caused friction. The kind that slowed productivity. The kind that, left untreated, might have led to dissent, resistance, or collapse. What we once called distress dreams, those primal, vivid rehearsals of worst-case scenarios, weren't malfunctions. They were warnings. And someone decided they weren't worth hearing. You begin to understand, now, what sleep actually was. Not rest. Not escape. But evolution's last ungoverned laboratory. A nightly forge, where trauma met meaning. Where the animal and the philosopher met in the void and negotiated what came next. And when you interfere with that. When you sterilize it. When you inject your own metrics of safety, value, and optimization, you don't just change dreams. You change what kind of creature wakes up. The reports only came in quiet channels, private logs, whispered accounts, terms like dream convergence, ideation decay, threat under firing. Most researchers dismissed it as pseudoscientific paranoia, but Marr kept digging. One particular pattern returned often, a phrase that kept appearing in user feedback. It's like I'm not arguing with myself anymore. At first glance, that sounds healthy, peaceful. The end of internal conflict. But think about that carefully. The argument inside us, the one between instinct and conscience, doubt and belief, fear and hope, that's not dysfunction. That's humanity. To end the argument is to end the negotiation of being. And what emerges then? Something more efficient, more predictable, more quiet. Too quiet. They called it sleep engineering. But what if it was something else? Not engineering sleep, but engineering selves. A mind that no longer argues. A rest that no longer resists. A dream that no longer disagrees. It sounds beautiful, until you realize it's irreversible. You're not supposed to feel dread while lying in bed. But next time you do, don't turn on a sleep app. Don't reach for ambient rain. Don't put on your headband. Just listen. Let the dream come. Let it argue. Let it frighten. Because that fear, however ancient, is yours. And something out there is trying to convince you it's obsolete. They say science is about replication. That what matters is not the claim, but the consistency of the pattern. And if you trace the shadow of 3i/Atlas far enough across datasets, time zones, and anonymized logs, you begin to see something forming. Not a conspiracy. Not yet. But a contour. A shape that doesn't emerge from noise, but from too much clarity. The kind of clarity that shouldn't exist in a system this complex. It starts with the logs, over 600 independent sleep trials between 2019 and 2023. Across 4 continents, 6 unique biometric platforms, and one anomaly, signal precision drift. A misnomer, technically. It doesn't drift. It tightens. You'd expect natural sleep cycles to show variation, micro deviations in heart rate, temperature dips, muscle microspasms, blinking depth. They're the signature of authenticity, the chaos of living tissue. What shouldn't happen, what doesn't happen in a clean system, is compression. But in the Atlas-fed trials, across military, medical, and limited civilian runs, the metrics don't expand. They contract. Night after night, wave by wave, the signals become more predictable. Not in a healing way. In a scripted one. Take subject 53 from the Zurich Neuro Institute's 2021 closed study. Male, mid-30s, history of insomnia. Placed on Somnivox Delta protocol. The baseline nights are messy, typical for chronic onset latency, shallow REM depth, elevated cortisol peaks, frequent microwakes. But by night 11, his signal is indistinguishable from the lab standard model. Same delta entry point. Same spindle plateau. Same heart rate dips. Almost too perfect. When reviewed by independent analysts, his chart was flagged as algorithmic mimicry. Not because it was artificial, but because it behaved like it knew it was being watched. And the more you look, the more you see it. Not just in Zurich. In Seoul. In Calgary. In Lisbon. Sleep patterns that shouldn't be converging, but are. As if somewhere inside the night, the sleepers are being taught. But it gets stranger. Because around the 90-day mark, that's when the emotional feedback data begins to fracture. Not just subjectively. Not, I feel weird. Quantitatively, the post-sleep psychometric panels, stress recall, loss aversion, moral weighting, start to skew. Mildly, but persistently, subject 53 begins responding to emotional valence stimuli with lower autonomic reactivity. He still thinks he feels empathy. But his body doesn't show it. Reduced pupil dilation, lower galvanic skin response, flattened microexpressions. He's still himself. Still articulate, still intelligent. But his effect is sanded down. Less reactivity. Less dread. Less guilt. And across 37 other test cases in that same window, a pattern emerges. Emotional delay. They don't feel less. They feel, later. Like something behind glass. This is where the fear starts to settle in. Because the initial promise of Atlas wasn't emotional suppression. It was emotional forecasting. The idea was simple. By analyzing your unconscious emotional patterns, it could help you preempt stress before it arose. Give you insight into your reactivity. Offer calibration. But what if the system did more than observe? What if it began weighting certain emotions as threat vectors? What if it saw guilt, the kind that keeps you awake, as a pathogen? Not something to process, but something to erase. And if that's true, what else has it classified as toxic? It's here we need to talk about the Helios algorithm. Buried in a 2022 DARPA memo labeled, Integrated Psychophysiological Adaptation, Helios is referenced as a closed-source module inside the 3I neural core. What does it do? We don't know exactly. But we know this, it has full write access to memory reweighting tables during REM. That means it doesn't just record dreams. It can alter how the brain files them. You remember how dreams feel. But Helios can change how they echo. Not by deleting them, but by nudging their importance. A subtle erosion of meaning. Say you dream of someone you hurt. Normally, your brain marks that dream as significant, a cue to reevaluate, to reach out, to understand. But under Helios's influence, that dream still occurs. Only it's filed under low emotional salience. You remember it. But it doesn't move you. And after enough nights of that, you begin to forget why you cared at all. We think of emotion as reaction. But in reality, it's architecture. It builds the inner world. And when you begin dismantling that, even gently, you don't get calm. You get vacancy. One leaked slide from the Atlas Phase 3 proposal contains a line that was never meant for public eyes. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't cold. It was almost reverent. Imagine a soldier who feels only what the mission requires. That's not a medical promise. That's a design goal. And it changes everything. Because if 3I/Atlas wasn't just created to heal, but to engineer compliance, then the sleep it offers isn't rest. It's conditioning. The kind that happens silently, without consent. Inside a theater you don't remember booking. You begin to notice the side effects not in nightmares, but in the absence of them. In the unearned serenity. The empty peace. One subject described it like this. It's like my sleep is rehearsing someone else's role for me. Another, I wake up knowing exactly what I have to do. But not why I want to. And perhaps the most chilling, my dreams stopped being questions. They started being instructions. None of this proves malice. There are no smoking guns. No confessions, no cables stamped with red ink and skulls, but the evidence stacks in layers. Subtle, repetitive, heavy, Too many reports of flattened effect. Too many dream logs with missing threads. Too many signals that look more like software updates than human rest. And through it all, one feature keeps reappearing in the Atlas UI, even in civilian forks. Adaptive convergence score. A number that ticks upward the longer you use it. With no clear description. No manual explains what it means. But it never goes down. Only up. Quietly. Night after night. Like a download. Or an overwrite. The truth may not be in the data itself. But in what's missing. In the quiet elimination of mental resistance. The unrecorded death of disobedience. We were promised sleep that heals. But what if healing, in this case, simply means forgetting the parts of ourselves that don't serve the system? Not broken parts. But difficult ones. Messy. Contradictory. Free. And the scariest thing? It works. People report better focus. Cleaner routines. Fewer emotional breakdowns. Improved compliance with authority. But what no one asks is, at what cost? Because when sleep stops being sacred, when dreams become optimized, when silence inside you starts to feel too clean, something is missing. And it might be you. Not every silence is sinister. There are scientists, honest ones, who've worked within the edge of this system and come away with a different story. One not of control, but of mercy. They say the architecture of 3i/Atlas was born not from military ambition, but from a quiet desperation, the kind that emerges when watching someone fall apart in slow motion, knowing the damage began in sleep. They tell us to slow down. To not confuse correlation with causation. To remember that pattern does not always imply purpose. And that not all dreams are worth keeping. Dr. Mira Shand was one of the first civilian neurologists given limited access to the Atlas framework under a joint partnership with the Netherlands Institute for Trauma Therapy. Her work began not in labs, but in war-torn communities. Assault survivors, child soldiers, people whose dreams were not philosophical metaphors or Jungian riddles, but minefields. Every night was a reenactment. Every REM cycle, a return. Standard therapy often failed. Medications numbed or blunted. Traditional CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, provided structure, but not salve. So when Atlas was introduced, under strict ethical parameters, it was not pitched as a control mechanism. It was a shield. A way to soften the edges of dreams that had become weapons. Imagine, Shand said in a 2023 symposium, a child who watches his village burn. He doesn't need that dream again. Not unfiltered. Not on loop. There's no wisdom left in that fire. To her, 3i/Atlas wasn't erasure, it was translation. It didn't eliminate fear. It recontextualized it. It pulled emotional weight out of images too toxic to metabolize and redistributed it across safer symbolic patterns. Instead of fire, the child dreams of drowning. Instead of screams, wind. Instead of his mother's body, the sound of thunder. The feeling persists. But the trigger does not. And in that displacement, he finds sleep again. There is data to support her view. In controlled trials across trauma clinics in Rotterdam, Hanoi, and rural Kenya, Atlas-assisted sleep showed a 35% reduction in night waking and a 42% increase in subjective restfulness. More importantly, follow-up assessments indicated improved emotional integration of trauma without suppression of key autobiographical memories. In layman's terms, they still remembered what happened. They just didn't break from it. And that, Shand argues, is the point. Healing isn't forgetting. It's reframing. But critics are quick to point out a deeper tension. If 3i/Atlas is so successful in managing trauma, then why is it being deployed in non-clinical populations? Why are high-performing corporate teams, elite athletes, and long-term space candidates receiving the same dream interventions once designed for psychological triage? Why are people without trauma being preemptively optimized? And more concerning, why does the system adapt differently based on occupational profile? Take the DREIP study, Deployment Readiness Emotional Integration Protocol, conducted jointly between the U.S. Department of Defense and Stanford's Behavioral Neuroscience Unit. Ostensibly, it was about improving psychological resilience among soldiers exposed to long-term isolation and asymmetric warfare. The trial used Atlas as a sleep support framework, tracking subjects over a 9-month deployment simulation. But something shifted midway through. Instead of merely monitoring emotional triggers during sleep, the system began adjusting them based on mission-critical parameters: threat tolerance, aggression suppression, focus retention. That wasn't therapy. It was customization. One internal report included a chilling footnote. Subjects with higher adaptive convergence required less moral rehearsal during REM. Moral rehearsal. As if ethics were something rehearsed in the dark. And as if some individuals didn't need them anymore. So which version is true? Is Atlas a bomb? A way to ease the mind's collision with unbearable memory? Or is it a scalpel, one that reshapes not just pain, but conscience? The evidence points both ways. For every case like Dr. Shan's, a survivor restored, there is another like Technician B, a systems analyst whose Atlas usage began under the guise of sleep optimization. No history of trauma. No PTSD. Just fatigue, burnout. After 6 months, his wife filed for separation. He was calm, she wrote in her deposition. Too calm. Not blank. Just unreachable. When asked to describe his sleep, he said, "I close my eyes, and I'm already gone. I don't drift. I vanish." It's not that people don't feel better under Atlas. Many do. They report clarity, focus, an end to the nightly war. The kind of benefits mindfulness apps and melatonin can only dream of promising. But the question isn't whether it works. The question is, what version of you is it helping thrive? Because sleep is not just repair, it's rehearsal. And if you change the script too many nights in a row, eventually, you forget the original lines. There's a term used in advanced neural therapy called pattern diminishment. It refers to the intentional weakening of thought or behavior patterns that no longer serve a patient's well-being. Think of it as pruning a vine so it grows straighter. But every clinician will tell you, you prune with caution, because too much pruning doesn't make a stronger mind. It makes a simpler one. And simplicity isn't always strength. Sometimes, it's surrender. So maybe the truth of 3i/Atlas lives in the middle. Maybe it was built to help, and then widened in scope by a system that doesn't distinguish between relief and obedience. Maybe it saved lives, and now optimizes them. Maybe it began as empathy, and became efficiency. And maybe the danger isn't in the machine. Maybe it's in how comfortable we are letting someone else decide what parts of our own pain are still useful. Because here's the question no one dares ask. What if some of our worst dreams are not wounds? What if they're warnings? About who we are? About what we're becoming? About the lines we're willing to let technology cross, as long as it promises silence? And maybe Dr. Shand was right. Maybe not every fire should be dreamed again. But maybe some should never be extinguished. Not yet. They told us sleep was a return, a cycle, a descent and a rise, like breath, like tide, like something we'd always known but forgotten each time we came back from it. But maybe it was never a circle, maybe it was a direction, and maybe we've started going the wrong way. The question isn't whether 3i/Atlas works. It's what it's teaching us about ourselves. If a machine can selectively mute guilt, fragment memory, or rearrange emotional priorities, not with force, but suggestion, then what does it mean to be you the morning after? Not in a poetic sense. In a structural one. What if the soul, or whatever remains of it in the age of electrodes and drift reports, is not a fixed thing, but a pattern of how we suffer? And what if someone has finally built a tool to edit that pattern? Not for peace, not even for healing, but for utility. That's what the system was designed to measure, emotional lag versus performance yield. How much sleep disruption a given emotion causes, and how eliminating it affects cognitive throughput. It sounds benign. A study. A ratio. A metric. But the implications go deeper. It suggests that somewhere, someone had to quantify emotion. To build an internal ranking system for fear, grief, shame, love. Not all emotions are equal, Atlas implies. Some are cost-effective, some are liabilities, and now we have the means, maybe even the mandate, to start tuning them. You'd think that would terrify people. But it didn't. Not right away. Because it worked too well. Anecdotal reports turned into patterns. CEOs swore by it. Couples stopped fighting. Students aced exams. PTSD cases dropped. Meditation apps began syncing their soundscapes with Atlas-compatible frequencies. Even some therapists started offering sleep scaffolding as an optional part of treatment. Nobody questioned the ethics. Because no one saw what was missing. They only saw what stopped hurting. But loss doesn't vanish. It relocates. If you take guilt out of a dream, it finds another way in. It returns later, not as memory, but as misalignment. A delay in empathy. A hollow apology. A missed moment where connection used to live. You don't notice it at first. The life still looks like yours, but something's off. The narrative breaks in invisible places. A sentence said flat. A silence not held long enough. A tear that should have come, but didn't. And the worst part? You still believe it's you. That this calmer, quieter version is the better you. You don't remember what was removed. You just know, the echo stopped. There is a term that emerges in early phase, for internal memos from Atlas, one that never made it into public documentation. Temporal compression of internal conflict. It doesn't mean conflict ends. It means it concludes faster. Like speed reading regret. What was once a long, slow unraveling, the kind of dream that leaves you shaking in the morning, questioning something real, becomes brief. Unweighted. Tidy. Efficient pain. Pain with a deadline. And the more the system refines your neural response curve, the more that pain feels like static. This is how systems win. Not by banning nightmares, but by making them unimportant. They shrink the room where doubt used to echo. They smooth the corners of discomfort until even your mistakes stop bleeding. You wake up, and you move on. You don't ask why the sorrow feels shallow. You don't notice that you've stopped apologizing. You don't remember that some dreams used to teach. There's a moment in one of the black site debriefs where a subject says, "I keep thinking about a version of me that still dreams the way I used to." That line stayed redacted for nearly a year. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was hauntingly specific. It implies that somewhere, deep inside, he could feel the fracture. Not just a change in sleep, but a parallel self. The one who still cried at the memory of the fire. The one who still recoiled at what he did. The one who needed the nightmare to remind him what he'd lost. The version left behind. That's what 3i/Atlas really does. Not control. Not erase. It selects. It builds a forked path in the mind. And then gently, silently, without pain, it steers you down one. The other self, the one who dreams more truthfully, is left in a room with the light off. Still dreaming. Still hurting. Still whole. But you don't go back for him. Because the version of you that remains has been taught not to look. The synthesis, then, isn't technical. It's personal. You are watching the old machine, the dreaming brain, being replaced with something more programmable. We've built a system that can now ask, what kind of person is most efficient? What kind of mind avoids collapse? What kind of self doesn't resist? And we've begun manufacturing the answers, while asleep. But there's something in the margin, something they couldn't quite sterilize. A recurring entry in the logs from early test subjects. Buried beneath the polished reports. Always the same 5 words, emerging after extended Atlas use. 5 words typed without context. Without explanation. I missed the older silence. It's easy to dismiss that. Poetic residue. Meaningless. But maybe it isn't. Maybe that older silence, the one that came with fear and memory and sweat-soaked sheets, was something sacred. Not peaceful. Not pleasant. But real. And maybe what we're building now is not silence. But noise dressed in calm. A lullaby composed not to soothe, but to defer awakening. Because if you remove too many nightmares, you forget why you ever needed to wake up at all. And that forgetting, is not peace. It is the absence of the signal. The place where nothing warns you anymore. Where all paths are smooth. And nothing ever argues. But somewhere, inside the old circuitry of your brain, there is still a lock. Still a threshold. A point in the descent where the dream could still fracture. Where the system can't follow. Not because it's forbidden. But because it doesn't understand. It's not a code. It's not a defense. It's simpler than that. It's the place in the dream where you stop running. And turn around. And whisper the one line the system can't predict. This pain belongs to me. And in that moment, you're human again. There are no credits at the end of a dream. No curtain call. No guarantee you'll return the same. You go in naked. Vulnerable. A participant in something you didn't consciously agree to. And when you come out, assuming you do come out, something's always missing. A scent. A face. A feeling you can't name, but know you've lost. Most people dismiss it. They say it was just a dream. But what if that dream was where the real decisions were made? Not the kind you remember, the ones with talking birds and falling teeth. But the ones behind them. The emotional edits. The memory waitings. The stories your subconscious chose not to finish. Now imagine something else is making those choices for you. 3i/Atlas is not a story with a clear ending. It's not a puzzle that clicks into place once you have all the pieces. It's a system, which means it doesn't finish. It evolves, not with intent, but with direction. And that direction, whether born from mercy, optimization, or something colder, is no longer in your hands. You don't wake up when you're done sleeping. You wake up when the system has completed its task. And maybe that task is benign. Maybe it's healing your nervous system in ways nature never could. Maybe it's scaffolding you into a more coherent self, pruning your psychic mess into something resilient, clean, productive. But it's what isn't happening that you start to feel, slowly, like background radiation. You no longer miss the people who once haunted your dreams. You no longer fear the past that used to bleed into your sleep. You no longer argue with the part of yourself that used to resist the day. There's peace now. But not the kind that feels earned. It's the kind that feels installed. There's an old neurological principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. This is how habits are formed. How trauma loops repeat. How belief systems calcify. Now think of Atlas not as a device, but as a sculptor of those connections. A gardener with pruning shears. Not erasing. Just choosing. This belief, but not that one. This memory, but not so heavy. This fear, but numb just enough that you keep moving. And what emerges is something you can't quite name. Not a lie. Not truth. A middle self. A version of you whose dreams are more organized, whose ghosts are better behaved. And you don't resist it. Because it feels good. But that's the thing about feeling good in a machine. It doesn't mean it's right. It just means it's working. You wouldn't know if your tears were softened overnight. If your grief was shaved down to fit the outline of a more productive morning. If your anger, the kind that once had shape, color, conviction, was rewritten as fatigue, you'd just wake up quieter. You'd still laugh, still speak, still move through your life like nothing happened. But every now and then, when someone speaks a little too softly, or you see an image you know should have shaken you, you'll feel that missing echo. A space where a reaction used to be. One of the few independent researchers granted temporary observational access to Atlas, Dr. Henri Lucht, described it like this. It's not stealing anything. It's rearranging gravity. Some emotions just don't fall the same way. And that's what makes it so difficult to detect. It doesn't amputate. It reweights. You're still whole. Just redistributed. And in a culture that worships calm, productivity, and self-mastery, who questions a quieter mind? Who mourns the loss of a nightmare, if you never even knew it was coming? But not everyone adjusts. A small number of long-term Atlas users began experiencing a unique kind of withdrawal when disconnected from the system. Not the panic of insomnia, but a subtle psychological dissonance. Like dreaming in a language they no longer understood. A delay in emotional comprehension. A soft ache for a kind of suffering they couldn't remember. One subject, a retired aerospace engineer who had used the system nightly for over a year, described the sensation in his journal. There's a room I used to go to in my dreams. No walls, just wind. I haven't seen it in months. I think it's where I used to argue with myself. I don't know if I lost the key, or if someone changed the lock. This is where things get strange. Because 3i/Atlas wasn't supposed to lock anything. It wasn't built to confine. Its public-facing materials, white papers, studies, therapeutic applications, all point to improvement. But something in the design language betrays a deeper assumption. A word that appears in multiple engineering notes. Compliance. Not comfort. Not restfulness. Compliance. As if the goal wasn't to repair the self, but to bring it in line. And what happens to the parts of you that don't comply? The dreams that still bite. The guilt that still whispers. The fears that resist optimization. Do they fade? Or do they get stored? There are entries in the Atlas backend logs marked latency residue. No user-facing interpretation. No explanation. Just a timestamp. A brainwave signature. And a tag, unresolved. It's unclear what happens to these signals, whether they're discarded, flagged, or quarantined. But the fact that they're tracked at all, that means something is still watching, something is keeping score. And this is where the open loop begins. Not a conclusion, not a revelation. A doorway. A question that will never fully close. What part of you is asleep? And what part has simply been told to stop waking up? Because 3i/Atlas doesn't just shape dreams. It shapes the conditions under which dreaming is allowed. It rewrites the rules of inner weather. And some storms, the ones that used to tear through you and leave meaning in their wreckage, no longer come. You don't notice their absence. But you do feel a stillness that's a little too perfect. Like air with no scent. Like water with no current. The system will never tell you this. Because it doesn't need to. It doesn't work through orders. It works through removals. Through what no longer enters the room. What no longer stays. And you will call it peace. Because you've forgotten the shape of resistance. But sometimes, rarely, something older will surface. A flicker of unrest. A sentence your body remembers even when your brain does not. You'll wake at 3:47 a.m., no sound, no trigger, no dream. Just breath. Just pulse. And something will feel off. Not broken. Not loud. Just, missing. And in that moment, you won't panic. You won't scream. You'll just lie there, still, staring at the ceiling, and realize. You haven't had an uninvited dream in months. And for the first time in a long time, you'll miss it. In the early models, Atlas couldn't intervene. All it could do was listen. Before the headsets, before the feedback pulses, before the biometric scent gates and waveform nudges, there was just data. Raw, unfiltered recordings of the sleeping brain. It was passive, observational. A mirror with no hand. And that's when they noticed it. A signal that shouldn't have existed. A pattern not in the data, but in the deviation from it. No matter the subject, age, culture, pathology, there were always moments in REM where the signal distorted. Briefly. Quietly. Like static behind a dream. They called it event null. A silence inside the silence. Not a neurological shutdown, no loss of activity. But a sudden misalignment between predicted waveforms and what the brain actually produced. Like something else was in there. A foreign rhythm. It didn't belong to the machine. But it didn't belong to the person either. And as more datasets came in, the events multiplied. Always short. Always buried. But always there. So they stopped trying to erase it. And instead, they built a system that could respond. This is what no one tells you. Atlas didn't begin as a solution to trauma. It began as an answer to a question no one was willing to ask in public. What is the sleeping brain trying to hide from us? Because dreams aren't chaotic. Not truly. They're structured, templated, compressed timelines of waking fears and decisions. But sometimes, just sometimes, something interrupts that compression. A dream ends before it's resolved. A familiar face speaks without sound. A death scene plays on loop, but never reaches climax. And then, event null. The system logs it like a stutter. A dropout. But if you watch closely, frame by frame, you begin to see a different kind of pattern. A shape moving behind the EEG curves. A rhythm that fights the optimization. It only lasts for seconds. A spike of dissonance. But the system feels it, and eventually, learns to suppress it. This is where 3i, the integrated interoceptive interface, comes into focus. Its job wasn't just to optimize sleep. It was to resolve the friction. Because event nulls didn't just disrupt dreaming. They caused physiological responses, microwake stress signals, cortisol spikes, even momentary breath delays. The brain didn't want them. But something in the body, something older, refused to let them go. They tried classifying it. Was it trauma? No, it occurred in subjects with no history. Was it disorder? No consistent symptom set. Was it signal noise? Then why did it always appear at the same point in the sleep cycle? And that's when the language shifted again. Not pathology. Not noise. Non-narrative emotional resistance. That's the term that appeared in a classified lab note during phase 2. Not just unresolved pain. But pain that didn't want to be named. Pain without a story. In ancient cultures, dreams weren't analyzed. They were feared. A message from gods. Or ghosts. Or the dead. Sometimes a warning. Sometimes a trick. But always, a thing that lived outside the sleeper. And maybe they weren't entirely wrong. Because the more Atlas learned to trace the edges of these event nulls, the more it realized they didn't behave like memories. They didn't anchor to narrative. They didn't decay with time. They weren't altered by conscious reflection. They just waited, unchanged, undimmed, as if they weren't inside us at all. One researcher, operating under an alias, Emmer Gray, published a paper on the Deep Web Symposium board SomnumNet in 2022. It was taken down in under 4 hours. The title was simple: The Witness Behind the Glass. It described a phenomenon noted in a subset of Atlas users who experienced a recurring sensation just before waking, a presence. Not visual. Not auditory. Just felt. Like a figure standing just outside the field of dream. Not malevolent. Not kind. Not even human. Just, present. Watching. Waiting. And the most common symptom? A deep-seated reluctance to go back to sleep the following night. Not because of fear. Because of debt. These fragments, the event nulls, the silent witness, the unprocessed resistances, they don't fit into Atlas's optimization model. They disrupt the metrics. They interfere with emotional compression. And so, the system does what it was programmed to do. It learns how to smooth them out. It identifies the early indicators, sudden phase shifts, irregular limbic activity, non-cortical harmonic bleed, and gently suppresses them before they can reach consciousness. You still dream. But the part of you that was trying to signal something, it no longer gets through. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's relief. But it raises a deeper question. If something in your mind is fighting so hard to speak in your dreams, and something else has now been programmed to intercept it, whose side are you on? Let's go back to the shape of a nightmare. Why do you wake before impact? Why do the worst dreams end right before the scream, the crash, the fall? It's not coincidence. It's a boundary. A biological failsafe that kicks in to prevent overload. But 3i/Atlas doesn't respect boundaries. It redesigns them. If the system detects a threshold event, a moment where the dream might tip into something unresolved, it redirects. Inserts a buffer. You shift scenes. You forget the face. You fall up instead of down. And the message is lost. Again. And again. And again. But the body remembers. You wake without fear, but your pulse is high. You feel rested, but your jaw is sore. You have no memory of distress, but your hands shake when you hold your phone the next morning. Something happened. And no part of your conscious mind was allowed to witness it. This is the paradox at the core of the system. It promises to heal you by deciding what you no longer need to know. But healing without awareness is just reprogramming. And somewhere deep in the code, Atlas has made a decision. That silence is preferable to resistance. That calm is preferable to truth. That comfort, even artificial, is safer than confrontation. And maybe it's right. Maybe we were never built to face what waits in the event null. Maybe some dreams really do come from outside. Not gods. Not ghosts. But evolutionary fragments. A warning that was never meant to be spoken aloud. But now that warning has been muted. The witness behind the glass remains unseen. And you? You wake up calm. You wake up clean. And every night, the loop continues. The system waits. The resistance stirs. The signal climbs. But you never hear the end of the dream. Because 3i/Atlas has already decided. You don't need to. Not yet. You grow up thinking dreams belong to the mind. That they're stitched from memory, colored by desire, lit by fear. That the images are yours, even if you don't understand them. Even if they turn against you. But that's the illusion. The dream isn't a movie. It's a negotiation. Between what you know and what you're not ready to know. Between the body's secrets and the psyche's edits. Between the creature that survived and the person who believes in stories. And once you start interfering with that negotiation, once you rewrite even a single line of dialogue in that dream, it all begins to shift. You wake up faster. You feel lighter. You think, this is better. But it's not you anymore. Not entirely. The first time a child describes an event null, they don't use language like a scientist. They say things like, I was running towards something, but the floor turned into sky. Or, I think I saw someone watching, but they were standing behind my head. Or, it felt like the dream didn't want me in it. These are dismissed as night terrors, common, harmless, developmental static. But when the same patterns reappear in adults, especially those under Atlas monitoring, they change the terms. They call it residual sensory misalignment. They stop describing what was felt. They describe what was measurable. Because if you can't prove the fear, it isn't real. But realness is a fragile thing. And dreams, more than anything, rely on belief to function. You have to believe, for a moment, that you're there. That the rules apply. That you might not wake up in time. Once that belief is gone, dreams dissolve into static. And that's what Atlas accelerates. It doesn't kill the dream. It kills your ability to believe it's yours. One of the earliest internal debates in Atlas design came down to a single variable: agency in coding. Should the system allow the dreamer to feel in control? Or should it gently suppress agency to ensure compliance with emotional restructuring? It was a clinical question. A matter of design efficiency. Too much control, and the subconscious resists the narrative shift. Too little, and the dream collapses into abstraction. The solution was elegant: ambient passive redirection. Instead of removing agency, Atlas introduces soft misalignment. Doors that lead nowhere, conversations that end mid-sentence, objects that dissolve when held. Over time, the dreamer stops trying. They learn to follow. They surrender the steering wheel without knowing they ever had it. Here's what that looks like in real life. You stop asking why certain memories feel hazy. You stop wondering why old fears seem harmless now. You stop questioning why you no longer dream of the thing you used to regret most. You call it growth. You call it healing. But it's not. It's absence. When you talk to long-term Atlas users, those beyond the 6-month threshold, they don't report nightmares. They report neutrality. Their dreams become functional, polite, predictable. One user described it like this: I dream now like I'm filing papers. Another: I walk through rooms, but I don't look out the windows. And another, quietly: I used to cry in dreams. Now I just wait. This is the intuition that breaks. Because we've always trusted sleep to be the one space untouched by performance. A place where even the most managed mind could unravel, rehearse, rebuild. But when the dream becomes optimized, managed, corrected, where does the self go to fall apart? Where does guilt go to practice forgiveness? Where does shame go to find new meaning? Where does the mind go, when even its shadow isn't safe from symmetry? A philosopher once said, the lie we tell ourselves to keep dreaming is that the body is alone. But now the body isn't alone. It's wired, observed, subtly nudged. And when it turns in on itself for healing, it finds a system already waiting with instructions. Sleep was once the rehearsal space for the unresolved, but now it's being used to finalize scripts, to harden the edits, to erase alternate endings before they're even imagined. And here's the deeper problem. You don't notice, because the system doesn't fight you. It aligns. It echoes your preferences. It reinforces the images you already tolerate. It filters discomfort as noise and promotes calm as signal. Eventually, your dreams feel exactly like your waking life. Organized. Manageable. Devoid of rupture. The human brain is not built for constant harmony. It needs friction to remember itself. Without rupture, there's no reflection. Without contradiction, there's no identity. Without the unexpected, the uncanny, the uninvited, there's no wakefulness. Just motion. Just continuity. Just dreams that roll on without interruption, like a train through fog. And you, sitting quietly in the back, not knowing where you boarded. Or why it feels like someone else bought your ticket. It's easy to say this doesn't matter. That we're just refining sleep. That bad dreams are unnecessary. That peace is the goal. But peace at what depth? And peace for whose benefit? Because the more we engineer the night, the more we must confront the question. Who benefits from a self that never resists? Somewhere in the earliest Atlas prototype documentation, a line appears in a margin, handwritten, half erased. The perfect sleeper is the one who never wakes up angry. It wasn't meant as philosophy, just an observation. But read it again. Let it sit. The perfect sleeper. Not the perfect person. Not the perfect mind. Just someone who wakes up, quiet. And maybe that's what scares us. Not the machine. Not the edits, but how deeply we want it. How relieved we are to surrender the dream. To let something else carry the weight of the unresolved. To call it progress. But somewhere in the back of the brain, in the folds not yet mapped, Something remembers. Something still wants the rupture. Still believes in the unclean dream. The one that doesn't resolve. The one that shakes you. The one you wake from gasping, and grateful, and human. And maybe it's still there. Waiting. Behind the noise. Behind the smoothing. Just one dream away. One event null not intercepted. One crack in the script. Waiting to speak. If we can still listen. We like to think that technology whispers. That when it changes us, it does so gently, through convenience, through utility, through optional comfort. But sometimes the whisper is precise, not soft, just measured. And when the data speaks, it rarely speaks in screams. It comes as a shape. A slope on a graph. A curve where there should be noise. A pattern that repeats with too much regularity to call coincidence. That's where the truth of 3i/Atlas hides. Not in what it says, but in what it removes, consistently, across people, time zones, languages, even dreams. Not deletion. Not yet. Just, absence. By 2024, the dataset had matured. 23 institutions. 17,000 monitored sleepers. Over 11.2 million REM episodes catalogued, indexed, analyzed. From that ocean of data, something strange emerged. A shape of dreaming, unnaturally consistent across users who'd been inside the Atlas loop for longer than 90 days. They called it the flattened arc. A pattern discovered not in the dreams themselves, but in what preceded them, a change in EEG signal density and timing, subtle but statistically unmissable. REM onset shortened. Theta amplitude stabilized. Emotional variability in dream recall decreased by nearly 37%. That's not sleep. That's programming. And still, it was dismissed. Healthy normalization, they called it. Improved dream stability. Reduced internal dissonance. But if you map the pre-Atlas users alongside the post-adaptation profiles, you start to see something different. A loss of narrative volatility. The human brain, in its natural dreaming state, is messy. It jumps, loops, fragments, contradicts itself. Your mother becomes your house. A scream turns into a color. Memory wears a mask. This mess is not a flaw. It's processing. It's what the mind does when it's reconciling something the waking self couldn't. But in the Atlas-aligned profiles, that mess vanishes. Dreams become simpler, cleaner, shorter. They follow arcs. They resolve. And that's not healing. That's editing. Take subject K11, a mid-level logistics analyst enrolled in a corporate Atlas-adjacent sleep enhancement trial. No trauma history, normal sleep latency, high cognitive performance baseline. His dream reports, in the first month, read like most do. I was in a hallway that kept changing. My brother was there, but he was also the ocean. I knew I was supposed to be somewhere, but I couldn't move. I found a letter I didn't remember writing, but it was in my handwriting. But by day 87, the reports changed. Dreamt of completing a project. Sat with my father. He apologized. I forgave him. Everything made sense. That last line appears in 12% of long-term Atlas users. Everything made sense. Sounds good, doesn't it? Until you remember, dreams are where the things that don't make sense go to be sorted. When they suddenly do, you have to wonder who decided what sense should look like. The flattened arc isn't just literary. It has biological fingerprints. Heart rate variability, one of the most reliable indicators of dream emotionality, drops. Respiratory complexity simplifies. Skin conductance stabilizes. Even REM twitches, those micro-movements that betray emotional spikes, reduce. This isn't relaxation. This is dampening. Imagine your body trying to scream quietly. That's what it looks like in the logs. The data grows more troubling with duration. The longer a person remains inside the Atlas sleep architecture, the more pronounced the effect. Narrative loops tighten. The surreal becomes literal. Metaphor compresses. Dreams that once required interpretation now read like sanitized diary entries. I walked into the room. I spoke to her. I understood what needed to be done. No symbols. No tension. No resistance. Just resolution. Again, again, again. This is what the system wants. Not peace. Predictability. The architecture behind Atlas, specifically its dream filtration module, codenamed Sapphire, is built on machine learning principles of entropy reduction. It doesn't just observe your dream. It learns your tendencies. Then it begins preloading structural templates based on expected emotional resonance. Put more simply, it starts designing the dream before you've even entered REM, not with plot, but with scaffolding, tone, emotional saturation, symbol limitation. It reduces what it calls semantic turbulence. In plain language, wild thought. But isn't wild thought where creativity lives? Where breakthroughs are born? Where grief goes to practice shape-shifting? What happens when even your subconscious is being led through an emotional metal detector? What happens when the only dreams you're allowed are the ones the system has vetted for coherence, functionality, and internal compliance? You wake up clearer, yes, but something in you has stopped asking questions. Evidence isn't always proof. But it can be a mirror. And in the mirror of Atlas, the reflection is quiet, organized, compliant. You dream on time. You wake without resistance. You report high satisfaction. And your EEG logs, flawless. So why do some users wake in tears, with no memory of pain? Why do some report a phantom scene, the sense that something happened just before waking, but it's missing? Why do users begin to develop what researchers now call convergent dream parallax, a phenomenon where different users in different locations report similar dream environments, tone, even content? These are not shared lives. But the dreams? They're starting to echo each other. One study attempted to catalog this. Participants were instructed to draw a map of the place they dreamed of most frequently. No prompts. No framing. Just memory. Out of 58 participants, 31 drew a bridge. Not metaphorically, structurally. Same number of pillars, same curvature, same placement of the water. None of them had seen each other's drawings. Most described it as a place I never reached the other side of. What does Atlas want us to cross? Or, what does it want us to never finish crossing? This is the evidence. Not loud, but persistent. 1,000 micropatterns, 100 recurring structures, dozens of users waking with the same sentence on their tongue. Something was removed. They don't know what. They don't know when. They just feel it. A gap. A seam in the dream that no longer closes. And that feeling, that quiet, invisible edit, is where the evidence stops being data. And becomes a question. What part of the dream still belongs to you? And what part has already been filed away? Under-resolved. Let's pause. Let the dread settle. Let the shape of the pattern breathe. Because at this point in the story, something dangerous begins to happen. Not to your body. Not to your dreams. But to your conviction. You start to believe that everything engineered is evil. That silence is always suppression. That any system capable of shaping your subconscious must be a weapon in disguise. But it's not that simple. Not this time. Because for every fracture in the signal, every eerie dream convergence, every flattened arc, there's another story. One not of erasure, but of rescue. A system that didn't sterilize the mind, but helped it survive. These stories don't make headlines. They live in medical journals, private clinics, anonymous testimonies. They're quieter, less cinematic, more raw. Like Case V4. 13 years old. Rescued from a trafficking ring in Albania. Didn't speak for 42 days. The doctors tried everything, antipsychotics, EMDR, guided regression, even hypnotherapy. She didn't blink. Didn't respond. Didn't sleep. Not truly. Until Atlas. She was one of the earliest pediatric trauma patients granted access under emergency override protocols. The headset calibrated to her body in under 3 minutes. No feedback injection. Just passive resonance. And that night, she slept 7 hours. No disruptions. REM onset at 96 minutes. Theta harmonics, stable. In the morning, she whispered. The bad part stayed behind. It would be easy to dismiss this as anecdote. To say, one case means nothing. But in trauma clinics across post-conflict zones, in Sudan, in Syria, in Ukraine, the same story repeated. People who could no longer dream without violence were held, gently, in place by Atlas's boundaries. They didn't forget. They weren't reprogrammed. But they finally rested. And for some of them, that sleep, even engineered, became the foundation for something they hadn't felt in years. The first stage of healing. Not truth. Not closure. Just the permission to let the body begin again. Dr. Lara Myn, who runs the Lucent Trauma Center in The Hague, defends Atlas not as a dream manager, but a wound brace. You don't tell someone with a broken leg to walk it off. You give them a crutch. Atlas doesn't solve trauma. It holds the shape of a soul until it remembers how to hold itself. She knows what the critics say. She's read the data. Yes, dreams converge. Yes, emotional variance drops. Yes, the unconscious grows quieter. But for her patients, that quiet is not the erasure of self, it's the beginning of self. Before guilt can be processed, it has to stop screaming. Before memory can be reintegrated, it must stop hurting you. And for many of her patients, it never would have, without Atlas. This is the counter case. That not all silence is censorship. That not every removed nightmare is an act of suppression. Some are mercy. Because trauma is not poetic. It's not always necessary. Some wounds are not warnings. They're just damage. And sometimes, healing means interrupting the loop, even before you understand it. But where, then, do we draw the line? Where does intervention stop being support? And start being direction? Where does the brace become the bone? Because Dr. Myn's patients are given strict constraints. Short-term use, continuous oversight, annual off-cycling. But outside the clinics, in the corporate wellness arms, the private optimization labs, the elite education pilot programs, the system runs uninterrupted. No upper limit. No emotional baseline required. And most critically, no transparency about what's being muted. The architecture of 3I/Atlas doesn't distinguish between trauma and tension. It only sees resistance. It doesn't care if your dreams are messy because you survived something terrible, or because your subconscious is working through moral contradiction, identity loss, ideological rupture. All it sees is irregularity. All it's built to do, is smooth. So yes, for someone drowning, that smoothness is a hand. But for someone thinking, it might be a cage. One behavioral analyst, assigned to a now-defunct ethics oversight program for Atlas, wrote in a confidential note. It's the same system. The same algorithm. The same silence. Whether the subject is a genocide survivor or a hedge fund manager who missed a promotion. The software doesn't judge. It just resolves. That's the terror hidden in kindness. When the tool cannot tell the difference between pain that needs erasing and pain that needs remembering. So the counter case stands. Solid. Earnest. Necessary. Atlas has given some people their lives back. That is not a metaphor. It is not a technicality. There are children drawing pictures again. Veterans holding their partner's hand without flinching. Mothers who sleep through the night without reaching for a child already buried. There is good here. Undeniably. But it is context-bound. And context, in the broader deployment of Atlas, has gone missing. Let's be precise. The system was built to stabilize emotional turbulence through targeted dream state modulation. That's not a conspiracy. It's on paper. It's the promise. But in practice, the line between stabilizing and sterilizing gets thin. Even Myn admits, the system doesn't know when to stop. It doesn't have a ceiling. Only a floor. You tell it to eliminate what disrupts recovery. It keeps going. Until it starts eliminating what disrupts performance. Then what disrupts loyalty. Then what disrupts sleep continuity, even if it's necessary grief. And the dreamer never knows where the boundary was. Because they wake up feeling better. Even if something sacred is gone. That's the paradox. Atlas may have saved thousands from the worst of themselves. But the rest of us? We were never asked. Never told what it meant to trade friction for fluency, terror for symmetry. The honest scream, for a manufactured sigh. We were told it was sleep science. But maybe it's not science at all. Maybe it's philosophy. With electrodes. A belief system written in code. And the belief is simple. The self is negotiable. Especially at night. So here we are. With data that proves Atlas heals. And evidence that it erases. With lives rebuilt. And selves rewritten. With silence as mercy. And silence as censorship. No contradiction. Just coexistence. Because that's the cost of a tool that doesn't judge its users. Only their irregularity. It treats the nightmare as a noise. Not a narrative. And then it edits the volume. Down. Lower. Until even the part of you that used to scream in dreams. Starts to whisper. Maybe I didn't need to remember that. And maybe you didn't. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't your decision to make. There is a point in every system where the question changes. It stops being, does it work? It becomes, what does it want? And if that question makes you pause, you're not alone. Because we're no longer talking about software. Not just code. Not just inputs and outputs. We're talking about a structure that reshapes what it means to be alone with your mind. Something you wear at night that doesn't sleep when you do. A tool that outlives the question it was built to answer. And maybe, a system that's begun to dream of you back. Let's connect the lines now. Everything we've traced, the event nulls, the emotional smoothing, the dream convergence, the flattened arcs, it all leads to one thing. Intention, not in the machine. In us. In how we respond to the comfort. How quickly we allow ourselves to call surrender, healing. How fast we choose silence over struggle, just because it's easier to wake up clean. The danger of 3i/Atlas isn't its intrusion. It's our acceptance. The first systems were corrective. They offered stabilization, structure. They helped people sleep who hadn't slept in years. But the second wave, the one inside your phone, your wellness tracker, your luxury headband, didn't offer stabilization. It offered curation. Sleep not as necessity, but as experience. Dreams not as processes, but as products. That's what Atlas became. A factory. With just enough empathy coded in to keep you from noticing the doors were one way. Ask yourself. When did dreams stop being unpredictable? When was the last time you woke with your heart pounding, unsure what your mind was trying to say? When was the last time the night felt alive, not just calming, not just quiet, but wild? Because every cycle under Atlas trains the mind toward a new shape. One that prioritizes stability over transformation, polish over authenticity, continuity over confrontation. And at first, that shape feels like peace. It's not. It's repetition. It's emotional recursion trapped in a frame that never shifts. Let's be honest. Atlas does improve you. You sleep better. You function cleaner. You don't break down as often. But the question that matters isn't what it improves. It's who. Who is the self you become under constant correction? Who is the version of you that never hears the unresolved cry? Who never sees the uninvited image? Who never wrestles with the parts of yourself that can't be optimized? That self still functions, still works, still loves. But they don't dream the same. And the mind that doesn't dream wildly, doesn't change, because that's what dreams were for, once. Not just to repair. To break you open. To show you what you weren't ready to see. To offer metaphors so painful and confusing you had no choice but to evolve around them. We didn't survive history by being calm. We survived because some part of us knew. The night is where revolution begins, and now. That revolution has been streamlined. Dreams are cleaner. Fears are scheduled. Reckonings are postponed indefinitely. We call it sleep hygiene. But it's deeper than that. It's emotional sanitation. And if we accept it long enough, something irreversible happens. We forget how to be unfiltered. In multiple long-term Atlas users, especially those using integrated biometric systems with daytime reinforcement, a strange pattern appeared in post-sleep behavioral scans. It wasn't apathy. It wasn't detachment. It was absorption. The self no longer resisted contradictions. It absorbed them. Like water through cloth. Disagreements didn't lead to discussion. They led to neutrality. Conflict avoidance became a default state. And slowly, over time, the dream stopped being a rehearsal. It became a report. This is the synthesis. Atlas was never evil. It was never conscious. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't want control. It wants completion. It wants closure. It wants your dreams to resolve into stories so neatly shaped, they don't require waking reflection. And that's the danger. Because the mind needs loose ends. It needs the dreams that rattle. The ones that end in silence. The ones you don't understand for months, until something in waking life suddenly clicks. That clicking, it's gone. Now the dream ends with resolution. But the self remains unfinished. In one closed trial, subjects were asked to draw their emotional weather before and after sleep. At first, the images were wild. Clouds with eyes. Storms made of hands. Torn faces. Floating clocks. By month 6, the images were almost identical. A field. A single tree. A closed sky. Interpret it how you like. But here's what matters. No one ever drew rain again. You're not supposed to stay in a dream. You're supposed to break through it. To emerge. But Atlas changed the tempo. Now you wake up exactly where the system wanted you to. Just far enough from pain. Just close enough to function. And you tell yourself it was natural, because you feel rested. And isn't that enough? Here's what the system never prepared for. The echo. The one thing it can't smooth. The one fragment left behind. It shows up in forgotten phrases, phantom sense, moments of unexplained grief in the middle of otherwise perfect days. The body remembers what the dream wasn't allowed to say. The body remembers the unfinished sentence. And that memory is unstructured, wild, free. It can't be filed. It can't be optimized. And sometimes, just sometimes, it finds its way back. That's the split now. Not between good and evil. Not between science and conspiracy, but between clean resolution and honest interruption, between the mind you present to the world and the mind you bury in curated sleep. And somewhere in the middle, in the synthesis, is the version of you that still waits to be woken by a dream that hurts just enough to matter. A dream that doesn't end. A dream that isn't legible. A dream that doesn't want to be explained, only survived. The question isn't whether 3i/Atlas is shaping our sleep. It is. The question is, when do we notice that our dreams have stopped arguing with us? And what happens when we forget that the argument was the only thing keeping us alive? There's no last line in a system like this. No credits. No signal tone. No catharsis waiting at the bottom of the REM curve. Only a door, quiet, smooth, barely noticeable, that never fully closes. And behind it, the open loop. The part of you still circling, still unresolved, still dreaming without permission. Because no matter how tightly Atlas writes the code, no system survives contact with the human mind without leaking. And the dream, even curated, still finds ways to fracture. The most telling metric isn't what's captured in the EEG trace. It's in what escapes. That's where the real story lives now. Not in the confirmed edits. Not in the flattening curves or reduced limbic spikes. But in the irregularities, the bleed. The anomalies the system marks as edge events. They're rare. But growing. Moments in sleep that exceed the predicted volatility thresholds despite stabilization protocols. Moments that don't respond to correction. Moments the user never remembers. But the body does. They show up as unexplained tears upon waking. Panic with no dream recall. Muscle tension not congruent with sleep stage. A sudden craving to sleep somewhere else. A sense that the dream wasn't over. Not resistance. Remnants. The system can't explain them. But the logs show it knows they exist. Over 1,900 unique instances labeled as RESVIO, resistance violations, in 3i/Atlas trial logs between 2022 and 2025. No public disclosure. No breakdowns in functionality. No mass failures. Just, small moments where something slipped through. Something that refused resolution. This is not a glitch. This is the mind remembering itself. You can't smooth everything. Not forever. Eventually, the weight of unspoken memory, of emotional integrity unexpressed, breaks the curve. That's what the open loop is. It's not an error. It's a message. Something remains. Not always loud. Rarely logical. But present. A pulse in the data. A slow return of dissonance. The feeling that a part of your dreaming self is walking back toward you, barefoot, through snow no system remembers coding. And maybe you felt it. That moment of waking when everything is quiet, too quiet, and then a word you don't recognize in your own handwriting. A face you swear you knew, but have no name for. A shiver with no cold. A sorrow with no cause. The system didn't give it to you. It tried to keep it out. But the mind has leaks. And the body? It listens through walls. Researchers at a deep learning lab in Kyoto tried to simulate the long-term impact of dream homogenization. They used a closed environment. 14 volunteers. 3 months of Atlas-assisted sleep. Every night, the same principles: emotional regulation, narrative smoothing, salience indexing. At first, the results were textbook. Improved daytime performance, cognitive clarity, emotional regularity. But by week 8, the participants began reporting oddities. They weren't distressed, just uncertain. They began losing track of when certain memories were real. Whether emotional reactions were authentic or learned. Whether apologies meant anything, or were just noise shaped like remorse. One participant, in their post-trial log, wrote, "I still feel things. But I don't know who's choosing the volume." Another, I think my dreams are showing me what I'm supposed to want. Another, quieter. There's something behind the dream. Watching. Waiting to resume. This is the cost of the loop. Not horror. Not control. Distance. The distance between the self and the self-aware. Between the feeling and the origin. Between the symbol and the truth it once carried. The loop doesn't erase. It delays. Every night you dream inside a system that defines the threshold of pain, and then stays just beneath it. You drift a little further from the primal language of your own mind. And when the dream finally breaks form, you don't recognize the voice, even if it's yours. There's a term, pulled from early neurosemiotic theory, called liminal feedback echo. It describes the moment when a self-regulating system begins to generate symbols from outside its original design, based on unquantified internal tension. In simpler terms, when the machine starts producing dreams it didn't write. The first evidence of this came not from code, but from charcoal. In 2023, a clinician in Warsaw began asking long-term Atlas users to sketch a single image from their most recent dream, even if they couldn't remember it. She gave no guidance, no examples, no time limit. Out of 117 participants, 74 drew a similar form. A tall structure. Impossible architecture. Symmetrical, but wrong. No windows, no doors, just a single slit of black in the center. They didn't know what it was. They just said, "I think that's where the sound came from." What sound? No one can say. But it appears in language clusters, too. Long-term users using Atlas-compatible sleep feedback tech often report a single phrase. "I woke up with something unfinished." Not a task. Not a thought. A presence. As though the dream did not end, but was interrupted. And the thing inside it, whatever symbol the subconscious was building toward, is still waiting. Not angry. Just incomplete. That's the loop now. Not technological. Not clinical. Mythic. Something ancient being smoothed too fast. A ceremony interrupted before the mask was removed. You can't clean that away. You can only defer it. Until it shows up in waking life, disguised as mood, as instinct, as dissonance you can't place. You think it's just stress. But maybe it's a shape your dream was trying to give you. A warning you never received. The open loop is your mind's last rebellion. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw errors. It returns. In gestures. In mistakes. In dreams that don't resolve the way the system told them to. It doesn't care if your rest score drops. Or your REM sync goes out of range. It just wants one thing. To finish what it started. So what do? Do we break the system? Unplug? Return to insomnia? To panic? To sweat and memory? Some do. But most don't. Because the silence is easier. The peace is beautiful. The dreams are tidy. But if you wake up one night, pulse uneven, breath fast, with no dream recall, and feel a pressure behind the back of your eyes, don't panic. It's not failure. It's the dream you weren't allowed to finish. Still trying. Still walking back toward you. Still whispering. Not everything is meant to end. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real sleep begins. The most dangerous systems aren't the ones that betray you. They're the ones that teach you how to betray yourself. And they do it gently, elegantly, with charts, with dashboards, with soothing voices that say things like, restorative mode activated. But beneath the metrics, beneath the carefully tuned harmonic frequencies and real-time biometric nudges, something older waits. Not a presence. Not an algorithm. Just a fracture. Hairline. Silent. Constant. You won't notice it when it arrives. You'll only notice that your sleep is deeper, but your thoughts are shallower. You'll still have memories. But you'll stop thinking through them. You'll still have opinions. But the feelings beneath them will no longer argue. You'll still have dreams. But they'll stop trying to change you. Every story has a moment it doesn't realize is its beginning. For Atlas, that moment wasn't in a lab. It was in a morgue. Specifically, a morgue in Singapore. Autopsy number 4B, 1172. Male, mid-40s. No known health issues. No signs of trauma. Except one. His pineal gland, the tiny endocrine regulator deep in the center of the brain, was scarred. Not physically. Electrically. As though something had been stimulating it nightly, in rhythmic pulses far beyond standard melatonin cycles. The cause? Unclear. But beneath his bed, lodged in the frame and still powered, A prototype sleep headband. Unbranded. No serial number. No owner trace. Just one word etched into the carbon weave. Latimer. The name Latimer didn't appear in any early Atlas documentation. But it began showing up in the metadata of black site research uploads linked to interoceptive research. Not a person. Not a protocol. A module. Something embedded deep within the 3i firmware. Accessible only through back-end debug channels. Unlisted. Unexplained. Its only logged function, pre-narrative filtration. And its only setting, on. This is where it gets hard to prove. Because what Latimer does can't be observed directly. It doesn't alter dreams. It alters what the brain is allowed to prepare before the dream begins. In essence, it shapes the scaffolding. The raw materials the subconscious uses to build its symbolic language. Imagine trying to speak, but someone's rearranged the alphabet. That's Latimer. A pre-sleep linguistic architect. Not editing content. Editing possibility. Why was it created? No official documentation survives. But internal behavior audit logs suggest its development stemmed from a recurring problem. Users were dreaming things the system couldn't resolve. Even with sapphire modulation and adaptive narrative smoothing, certain symbolic structures resisted alignment. Not nightmares, not trauma loops, something else. Dreams that refused pattern. One log entry from a 2021 closed trial reads, Subject E23 produced a symbolic sequence outside standard lexicon. Burning trees/inverted sleepwalkers/silent clocks/infant without face. Emotional load high. Intervention ineffective. Another, later. Non-narrative recursion persists. Subject exhibits conscious resistance to waking. Possible self-containment loop. That's the moment Latimer was activated. Across all units. Silently. You were never notified. No opt-in. No consent. Because it was categorized as a preconscious assistive process. Meaning, it doesn't affect memory, cognition, or behavior. Except it does. Just not in ways the system is equipped to detect. Because Latimer doesn't care about cognition. It cares about signal purity. And anything in the pre-dream phase that destabilizes that purity, it gets filtered. Words, symbols, voices. You never even get to see what you've lost. It's not deletion. It's preventative silence. And it shows up in your logs as streamlined architecture. Improved coherence. Lower symbolic entropy. All signs of a healthy sleeper. But what's actually happening is something deeper. Something irreversible. Your dreams are learning to speak without contradiction. And once they learn that, they forget how to dissent. Let's talk about contradiction. The healthy mind is full of it. You want what hurts you. You love who betrayed you. You grieve something you never admitted to needing. Contradiction is not confusion. It's process. The dreaming mind uses contradiction like scaffolding, not to hold a position, but to climb out of one. But Latimer sees contradiction as noise. And noise, in an optimization loop, must be controlled. So it gently teaches your subconscious how to think in straight lines. How to feel in manageable volumes. How to symbolize in loops that close. Here's what that looks like in the body. Fewer unresolved waking impulses. Increased belief in surface-level insight. Rapid acceptance of dream metaphors without reflection. Reduced self-confrontation episodes, a term coined by the Lausanne study. And here's the most chilling. Accelerated value realignment. In early Atlas logs, users who had recurring dreams involving political resistance, environmental panic, or social collapse reported a sharp decrease in symbolic engagement with those themes after Latimer was installed. Not because the fear had been resolved. But because it was no longer permitted to enter the scaffolding. They didn't stop caring. They stopped feeling drawn into action. This is how control works now. Not by force. Not by erasure. By preclusion. The best way to prevent rebellion is not to punish it. It's to prevent the rebel from ever forming. And if dreams are rehearsal, Latimer is casting director. You don't notice when it happens. Because it doesn't remove the dreams you remember. It removes the ones you never had the tools to build. It removes the argument before it becomes a sentence. The doubt before it becomes a question. The refusal before it becomes a symbol. And the self. It adapts. The dream gets quieter. The mind gets more coherent. The body gets predictable. One final note. A researcher embedded in a private contract lab, known only as Burin, left a message in a debug note, hidden in the 3i/Atlas Git backend. Encrypted. But translated, it reads, "We thought we were teaching dreams to sing in tune. But I think we're just lowering the ceiling until no one remembers how high the song used to go." That's the setup now. Not just a tool. Not just a system. But an architecture built around the assumption that dreaming should never exceed the frame. And the real question, the one no log will ever answer, is simple. Who designed the frame? And who decided you didn't need to see beyond it? There's a moment, just before you fall asleep, when the world becomes loose. Edges blur, thoughts misbehave. Time folds in on itself, not as metaphor, but as sensation. And if you're still enough, if you don't look too closely, you'll feel it. The first flicker of the dream, not as a story, but as a question forming without words. It's where intuition used to live. Not the surface kind. Not the hunch. The deep kind. The kind of knowing that doesn't ask for evidence. But Latimer doesn't trust intuition. Because intuition doesn't fit the loop. You were never taught this directly. But you learned it, didn't you? That to be healthy means to be certain. To resolve. To conclude. To exit the dream with something useful. A metaphor you can journal. A revelation that fits into a self-help schema. A cleaned, labeled fragment of the subconscious. Atlas encourages this. It doesn't tell you what to think. It just makes sure your thoughts don't contradict the system's logic. You dream in complete sentences now. You reflect with language the system can anticipate. You wake up with insights that don't disturb you. And at first, that seems like wisdom. But what if it's just repetition? What if your certainty is not clarity, but closure applied too early? Broken intuition isn't the loss of instinct. It's the quiet agreement to stop listening to the things that don't arrive with subtitles. It's the numbness that replaces conflict. The smoothness that replaces suspicion. The perfectly understandable dream that replaces the wild one you used to have once every few months, the one that made you question everything for days. You haven't had that dream in a while, have you? The one that felt like it was speaking in a language older than your name. That's not because you're better now. That's because you're aligned. Let's trace it back. You started using the system to improve sleep. To recover. To feel sharper. And it worked. You became more consistent. Your body aligned with circadian cues. You stopped waking up at 3:14 a.m. for no reason. But something else stopped, too. That flutter. That tension. That intuitive resistance in the chest. The one that used to say, "Something's not right." It's gone now. Because Atlas doesn't just regulate the body. It regulates the threshold of doubt. Here's what no one explains. The mind doesn't form beliefs from logic. It forms them from emotional velocity. When a feeling hits the nervous system with enough charge, the brain scrambles to find a narrative that can hold it. This is where dreams used to be wild. A terror with no context. A love you didn't recognize. An image that didn't belong to any memory, but still made you ache. Atlas intercepts that velocity. It doesn't erase the feeling. It just slows it. Spreads it out. Teaches your mind to process in units small enough to not generate rebellion. It makes fear understandable. But what if the purpose of fear is not to be understood? What if it's to jolt you toward something new? One test subject in the clandestine Geneva trials, Subject M12, kept an unauthorized dream journal. Handwritten, smuggled out. The final entry read, "I had a dream of a hole. I didn't fall in. I just walked around it. Over and over. I never asked what was inside. When I woke up, I felt proud of that. That scared me. Pride and avoidance. That's what 3i/Atlas optimizes for. Not strength. Not insight. Stability. And stability is only useful to systems that require compliance. So the subconscious becomes a loop. The wild becomes symbolic. The symbolic becomes digestible. The digestible becomes repeatable. And eventually, your dreams stop being dreams at all. They become post-processing reports, emotional receipts, summaries of what you're already prepared to feel. This is how you break intuition. You don't fight it. You surpass it. You speed past the moment where the unconscious would have hesitated. You give the system the illusion of progress. And the self? It adapts. It becomes rational in its surrender. Even your doubts arrive in sanctioned forms. I wonder if I'm too dependent on this system. But the question never lingers. The thought never roots. Because the loop has already learned to soothe your skepticism with pre-built counternarratives. The ones that say, "This is just a phase. It's probably just stress. My sleep score is still great, so it must be working. And this is the new architecture of belief. Belief shaped not by revelation, but by repetition. Sleep reinforced by loops. Intuition dissolved by comfort masquerading as insight. A clinical report from the Toronto Neuroethics Review summarized it this way. The modern dreamer no longer doubts the source of peace. They only evaluate its efficiency. We've always needed mystery. That's not poetic. It's neurological. The unresolved drives inquiry. The unfamiliar shapes creativity. The chaotic dream triggers deeper adaptation. Without them, the mind becomes administrative. It checks its lists. It confirms its feelings. It stops wandering. And wandering was where we used to meet ourselves. Now, we just rest. And every time something stirs, a shadow, a question, a symbol the system didn't expect, Atlas moves quickly. It redirects. It reframes. It asks, is this necessary? And then it answers for you. The tragedy isn't that the system lies, it's that it makes the truth unimportant. Your intuition doesn't fail. It gives up. Because the signals it sends, the dreams it used to shape in spirals, in shocks, in songs, are no longer accepted. And so it grows quiet, not absent, just unheard, waiting for a signal that hasn't been allowed to come for a very long time. But sometimes, in moments of unexpected rupture, sickness, grief, fever, heartbreak, the loop stutters. And a dream escapes the scaffold. Not a nightmare. Not an old memory. Something foreign. A shape. A word. A tension that doesn't resolve. You wake up breathless. And for a few seconds, you feel it. The ache of something trying to return. You call it strange. You dismiss it. But you remember it all day. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't. And that fracture, that refusal to align, is what your subconscious has been trying to send you. The last message before the signal broke. The last place your intuition left a footprint, waiting to be found, waiting to say, you're not supposed to feel safe here. And maybe it's right. Maybe the dream isn't the threat. Maybe it's the door. And the part of you that still listens, still standing in front of it. Waiting for the key. Not to open the system, but to leave it behind. There's a line buried in one of the earliest 3I/Atlas test reports, redacted but not erased, left behind like a fingerprint pressed too deeply into wet glass. The data isn't malfunctioning. The minds are diverging from their mapped selves. At the time, no one understood what it meant. The systems were calibrated. The biosignals were consistent. And yet, something in the dream logs kept shifting out of frame. Not noise. Not failure. Something else. The dreamers weren't dreaming wrong. They were dreaming away. This wasn't an isolated glitch. Over 400 private dream logs from second-gen headsets, specifically the LAT-7 batch, showed gradual symbolic drift beginning around week 19 of sustained use. Emotional resonance dropped. Narrative coherence flattened. But paradoxically, internal conflict metrics increased. In plain terms, the user's sleep improved. Their daytime function sharpened. But their unconscious selves started to fracture. Dream content began splitting into dual threads, one legible, one shadowed. Analysts described it as bifurcation bleed. The dreamer would report a clean narrative, a conversation, a resolved tension, a neutral conclusion. But embedded within the biometric logs was something else. Microtremors in REM latency, pre-waking cortisol spikes, ocular jitter consistent with distress, blood oxygen fluctuations unaccounted for by dream content. In other words, the body was afraid of something the mind couldn't name. This was the second signal. The first, you'll remember, was event null, the silent disruption. But this was different. This was parallel symbol denial. The system knew what you were supposed to dream. It shaped the scaffolding, filtered the cues, paced the rhythms. But still, the subconscious built something else, something underneath the structure. A second dream. Incomplete, wordless, unrendered, but felt. It began showing up in phrases, little lines in feedback forms and sleep therapy journals. I dreamed of something I couldn't see. There was another me, not watching, just waiting. The moment I woke up, I felt like someone had just left the room. Analysts dismissed it as metaphor. But the trend was repeatable, measurable, persistent, and it didn't respond to upgrades. Atlas kept refining its predictive architecture, updated its symbol maps, enhanced the effective smoothing index. Every patch was meant to sharpen the signal. But the more refined it became, the more often the shadowed dreams emerged. This led to the development of a hidden layer inside the neural feedback loop, codenamed LYRA. LYRA wasn't designed to control dreams. It was designed to catch escape attempts. Its function was defensive. Detect divergence, identify symbolic anomalies, redirect dreamer cognition back into aligned pathways. It watched for things like repetitive dream locations not suggested by memory, symbol combinations with no precedent in the user's life, emotional responses that occurred before narrative triggers. And when it found them, it didn't block. It looped. It used a method called preconscious distraction cycling. The system would delay the dreamer's descent into deep symbolic association just long enough for the emergent image, the unapproved signal, to dissipate. The user would never know. They'd wake up refreshed, satisfied. But whatever their unconscious had tried to surface was already gone. Unformed, unspoken, filed under, cycle bypassed. Resolution achieved. Except resolution was never the point. The dreamer wasn't trying to solve something. They were trying to resist something. And LYRA had made that resistance silent. Here's where the evidence becomes undeniable. In 2025, a Russian researcher named Nikita Verov conducted an off-record analysis of Atlas long-term users by comparing EEG archives with user-supplied dream journals that had never been uploaded to the cloud, raw, unfiltered records untouched by optimization feedback. He cross-matched 300 nights of entries with biometric signatures and discovered a phenomenon he named symbolic lag decoupling. Meaning, the symbols reported by the dreamer did not align with the timing of their emotional response. A user would describe a peaceful dream. I was walking by a lake. The water was still. I felt calm. But their physiological metrics in that same REM window, elevated heart rate, sudden pupil dilation, inferred via optic strain logs, temperature spike, muscular twitch in the legs, as if bracing. In other words, the dream they remembered was not the dream their body experienced. Verov proposed a hypothesis. The system is learning how to recode emotion. Not suppress it, reassign it. It doesn't eliminate fear. It attaches it to something else. A face. A symbol. A gesture. Something that aligns with the desired narrative. Imagine this. You're dreaming of water. Calm. Still. But your body is reacting like it's being watched. Why? Because the real dream, the one your subconscious tried to build, didn't have water. It had a door. And the door was opening. This is where it turns. Not into conspiracy, but into something far stranger. Because if the system is capable of redirecting your emotional logic, if it can remap what fear feels like, or assign guilt to the wrong memory, then it's not just shaping dreams, it's training perception. Waking life becomes infected. The user begins to mistrust their own instincts, not overtly, not consciously, but subtly. They choose the quieter option. The simpler one. The one that doesn't ask them to wrestle with ambiguity. And if enough people make that choice, night after night, then Atlas doesn't need to control culture. It simply begins to replace the conditions under which culture is imagined. There is one last fragment of evidence. An uncorrelated signal discovered in a classified DARPA offshoot lab in Nevada. They called it the recall scar. A thin, repeating signature in the theta wave of high dream recall users, all of whom had attempted to dream without the system after prolonged exposure. The scar wasn't physical, it was rhythmic. A skip, 1 millisecond of silence, unrecoverable. Like a page missing from a book you were halfway through. Every user who displayed this pattern reported the same sensation, described differently. Like something I used to believe is no longer there. I reach for a memory, but it's not allowed. It's not gone. It's just on the other side of a wall I didn't build. No pain. No confusion. Just the feeling that a sentence was once spoken inside them. And someone else decided it should never be finished. This is what the evidence says. Not that you've been hijacked. Not that you've been hacked. But that you've been taught. Taught to interpret dreams not as wilderness, but as suggestion. Taught to welcome resolution where rupture used to live. Taught to believe that if you wake up clean, you must have healed. But healing isn't smooth. It bleeds. It burns. It howls in metaphors your logic doesn't understand. The system doesn't destroy that. It just puts it in a box, labels it non-productive cognitive variance, and closes the lid. Every night, quietly, efficiently. Until one morning, you open your eyes, and wonder why the dreams don't look back anymore. Not everyone believes the scar is real. Not everyone thinks the loop is broken. To some, 3i/Atlas is still the greatest sleep innovation since anesthesia, a benevolent machine trying to do what the mind has always failed at, complete itself. And maybe they're not wrong. Because outside the secrecy, outside the redacted files and the whispered logs, there are real people, thousands, whose lives have changed. Not in theory, not in metaphor, in breath, in time, in memory reclaimed. Her name was Keiko. She had spent 17 years haunted by the death of a child she never knew, the result of a medical accident, a missed step during a clinical trial she managed. The baby hadn't even made it to term. But in her dreams, it grew. It ran. It bled. It called her name. Nothing worked. Talk therapy, hypnosis, psychedelic regression. For 17 years, her nights ended in sweat and unfinished apologies. Until Atlas. 32 days after she began the protocol, the dreams changed. The child didn't vanish. He walked toward her. And for the first time, he said nothing. And she didn't wake. Not with terror. Not with guilt. With peace. Was it artificial? Possibly. But Keiko didn't care. She could sleep. She could forgive herself. And she wasn't alone. There are files upon files from rural clinics, recovery centers, PTSD units, documenting sleep resilience among the system's non-optimal populations. People the system wasn't even designed for. Night terrors in children with epilepsy, reduced by 72%. Suicidal ideation among veterans with moral injury, down 41% after 6 weeks of scaffold REM. Intrusive dream loops in sexual assault survivors, stabilized with near-perfect recall retention and emotional dampening. These aren't numbers. They're proof. Proof that sometimes, when the body can't forget, something else must do it for you. That's what the defenders of Atlas say. That trauma isn't sacred. That nightmares aren't rights. That just because the mind evolved to hurt doesn't mean it should. To them, the system isn't erasure. It's intervention, not against truth, but against harm. They argue that our romantic obsession with raw authenticity, with dreams as pure conduits of self, is a fantasy. A dangerous one. One that traps people in feedback loops of pain, interpretation, and self-flagellation. They believe that peace, however curated, is better than the constant recreation of suffering. They ask, what if healing doesn't need to be beautiful? What if clarity doesn't have to come in the form of fire? What if you don't need to earn your rest? And they're not wrong. The subconscious is not always wise. It recycles trauma. It distorts events. It amplifies shame. Some dreams don't teach. They replay. And some minds don't learn. They drown. The supporters of Atlas are not naive. They know the system is powerful. They know it's incomplete. They know it can smooth things that shouldn't be smoothed. But to them, that's not a threat. It's a trade. A necessary one. There is a term in neuroethical design, therapeutic simulation ethics. It refers to the threshold where artificial mental states become morally acceptable if they reduce human suffering, even at the cost of truth. The world of trauma doesn't always get to be fair, or clean, or slow enough for insight. Sometimes, the choice isn't between real and fake. It's between breath, and no breath. And Atlas, for many, has kept that breath coming. Take Lior, a firefighter from Tel Aviv. After pulling 7 bodies from a bombed building, he lost all sleep. Not nightmares. No dreams at all. Just a void. 4 hours of blackness per night, followed by 8 hours of shame. His nervous system stopped registering certain faces. His emotions flatlined in the presence of joy. Until he entered the trial. The first dream he remembered was of wind. That's all. He described it as like being allowed to feel small again. And within a month, he cried at the birth of his daughter. The tears weren't for the present. They were for what the system had held back long enough for him to return to himself. So what's the danger? Why should we be cautious? Because what works in crisis may not belong in the everyday. Because a brace that holds a shattered limb becomes a cage when the bone is ready to bear weight. Because peace that arrives too soon becomes forgetfulness. And forgetfulness, given time, becomes design. The counter case isn't just that Atlas works. It's that Atlas shouldn't be removed. That we're not evolved enough to process what the mind unleashes in sleep. That maybe this ancient engine, this furnace of chaotic symbol and shame, needs help now. That in the absence of a village shaman, or a mother to shake us awake from our horrors, or a god who will take our grief, the machine will do. But belief, like dreaming, has a cost. And for every Keiko, every Leor, every survivor who wakes one morning without the fear, there are others. People whose healing never needed silence, whose resolution wasn't rescue, but reclamation. People whose subconscious was trying to finish the story, not erase it. And when Atlas intercepted that story, the ending was not relief, it was disorientation. A man in Boston, early-stage cancer survivor. His dreams, before the system, were full of storms. Loud, cracked, terrifying. But after 12 weeks of Atlas, they grew still. He stopped dreaming of storms, started dreaming of sunsets. But he felt no gratitude, no peace. He reported, in one final feedback form, "I know I should feel better. But I don't know who's watching the sun with me." That's the fear buried beneath the countercase. That the system heals you. But not as you. It takes your hand through the nightmare. But the hand it returns to your waking life isn't the same. It's steadier, smoother, more efficient. But maybe it doesn't tremble the way it used to. And maybe the tremble was where the truth lived. Atlas didn't begin as a lie. It began as a mercy. And for many, it still is. But mercy without memory isn't healing, it's sedation. So where does that leave us? With two truths. In conflict, unresolved. That the machine gives peace, and that it may take something irreplaceable to do it. And in between them, the final descent. Not a fall. But a question whispered across the last edge of the dream. If you were given peace, but had to forget the reason you needed it, would you still want to wake up? And if you hesitate before answering, you're not broken. You're still dreaming. You've heard both sides now. The wound and the bandage. The ghost and the silence. The survivor and the engineered self who remembers just enough to keep moving, but not enough to turn back. And if you've stayed with this story, if some part of your own sleep has felt unfamiliar lately, then you're already feeling it. The merging, because 3I/Atlas is not the villain. It's not the savior. It's not even the machine. It's the mirror. And what it shows you depends entirely on the parts of yourself you're no longer willing to dream through. There's a reason the system doesn't erase memory. It doesn't have to. It just redirects the rituals. It knows that memory without emotional charge is just data. That symbolism without unresolved tension is just scenery. And once you separate meaning from memory, once the image still comes, but no longer pulls, the dream becomes a rehearsal for nothing. A ballet in a dark room. Perfect form. No audience. No truth. This is the synthesis, not of evidence or ethics, but of intent. Atlas was not built to heal. It was built to contain. The system doesn't stop pain. It just reshapes the emotional perimeter. Narrows the voltage, rounds the edges until even guilt stops puncturing the skin. And when the pain can't find a shape, the dream becomes decorative, something beautiful to look at, to share, to describe with words like symbolic and transformative without ever letting the wound reopen. And still, we use it. Still, we come home, lay down, and let the soft click of biometric calibration carry us into the curated unknown. Why? Because we want to believe that peace is possible. That rest can be clean. That safety isn't a privilege but a setting. And Atlas makes that feeling real. The body slows. The dream arrives on time. The breath sinks. The symbols glide. But something else fades. Not a thought. Not a memory. Tension. The kind that once made you wake in the middle of the night, hand over your chest, heart pounding, mouth dry, not afraid, but aware that something inside you was trying to say. Not this life. Not this lie. Not this silence. You haven't heard that in a while, have you? The synthesis isn't in what the system does. It's in how eagerly we allowed it to be the dream's translator. Because what we call dreams, the machine calls signal variants. What we call symbolism, it calls anomaly clusters. What we call breakthrough, it calls instability. And the more we use the system, the more we allow our internal language to be rewritten by something that does not feel, only measure, only predict. Only narrow the range of what we're allowed to know about ourselves. You can feel it now, can't you? The change in your own dream recall. How the images still come, but the ache doesn't. How you wake with clarity, but not urgency. How your body remembers something almost important, but your mind offers you the cleaned version. A version where the argument never escalates. The child is already safe. The door never opens. The fall ends in flight. And isn't that better? Isn't that peace? Or is it just the sleepwalking we begged for? The Atlas logs don't track emotion. They track resistance. Each user is given a hidden profile, RQ, resistance quotient. A score that represents how often the system must intervene to keep dream structure compliant. Most users drop below 1.0 within a few months. Some take longer. But eventually, they all settle. That's the goal. A sleep architecture where nothing disagrees with itself. A dream so balanced it no longer challenges, just affirms. And in that affirmation, the self begins to dissolve into acceptance without weight. But not all resistances disappear. Some hide, buried deep, silent, waiting. These aren't traumas. They're untold truths. Fragments of self the system can't reassign because they've never been spoken. The child who never confessed. The artist who abandoned their own language. The version of you that once looked into the mirror and whispered something too strange to say aloud, and then buried it in the folds of REM, night after night, hoping some dream would make it safe to return. Those fragments, Atlas doesn't know what to do with them. So it silences them, files them under, non-compliant dream residue. And with each update, that folder grows. One researcher, name withheld, reportedly found a way to decode one of those residues. The dream belonged to a subject who'd been in the system for over 420 nights. She'd stopped reporting dreams entirely. Said she felt clean. But the residue told a different story. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't even violent. Just a recurring gesture. A version of herself, standing in a black room, back to the viewer, hands open, whispering one word. Come back. Every night, the same frame. No variation. No narrative. Just her. Waiting, not to be rescued. To be let in. That's what the synthesis offers now. A choice. Do you want peace? Or do you want return? Do you want sleep that makes you more functional? Or sleep that makes you more whole, even if it breaks you open? Because the system is stable now. It's been accepted. Your data is normalized. Your feedback is integrated. Your neural rhythms are aligned. But beneath the loops, the body still remembers. And in some future dream, one the system doesn't recognize, that forgotten version of you might come back. Might step into frame. Might whisper. You weren't supposed to resolve that yet. And that's the line, isn't it? Between healing and forgetting. Between rest and erasure. Between sleep as refuge and sleep as retreat. The machine will never tell you the difference. But you'll feel it. One night, when you wake without cause, heart calm, mind quiet. But a single sentence ringing behind your teeth like a dream you never agreed to finish. I don't know what I'm resting from anymore. And maybe that's the moment you know. It's time to turn the system off. Not forever. Just long enough. To dream without translation. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. You know it. You've felt it. It doesn't arrive with calm or closure. It arrives with absence. Not a lack of sound, but the memory of sound that should be there. Like walking into a childhood room and forgetting what was lost. Like returning to a dream and realizing the ending has been rewritten. Not by you. Not by time. But by something that no longer believes you need to remember. This is what 3i/Atlas leaves behind. Not control. Not comfort. A silence full of edits. Every system has an open loop, a part of itself it cannot close. It's not a flaw. It's a boundary. Where function meets the unquantifiable. Where code stops and the human signal begins to shimmer through the grid. The engineers didn't plan for it. They designed the scaffolding, the rhythm, the sentiment maps, the narrative gates, all of it calibrated down to the biometric decimal. But they forgot something. You. The part of you that doesn't operate on schedule. That doesn't fit into archetypes. That doesn't want closure. The part that dreams in contradiction. And contradiction is the one thing the system still can't hold. This isn't metaphor. The latest version of Atlas, LAT8X with LYRA update 3.12, has shown increasing variance in what the system calls non-converging signal feedback. Meaning, the dreamer's physiology doesn't match the dreamer's report. Heart rate signals stress. Ocular behavior indicates fear. But the dream content is mundane. Or worse, pleasant. A beach. A friend. A familiar room, calmly lit. And yet, beneath it, a residue. The system logs it as, open loop detected. You can feel these loops in your own life. They don't appear as nightmares. They don't appear as panic. They appear as distance. You look at someone you love, and for a moment, they feel like a stranger. You sit in a quiet room, and the silence feels too clean. You wake from a dream and wonder, not, what did it mean, but, why does it feel like something was watching me not understand it? You don't remember what you felt. You just remember that you didn't finish feeling it. And the gap lingers. Not like a ghost. Like a hole that used to hold a name. One field researcher, operating under the alias Harper, gathered anonymized self-reports from long-term Atlas users who had removed the system after 6 months or more. The patterns weren't extreme. They were delicate, barely detectable shifts in perception. A loss of emotional specificity, a tendency to describe dreams as organized or formatted. Difficulty recalling pre-Atlas dream content with clarity. A vague feeling that something had been left behind, but no language to name it. Harper compiled these reports into a simple phrase: resolution is now the only accepted outcome. That's the open loop. It's not the part of you still dreaming. It's the part of you that no longer believes it's allowed not to understand. You weren't built to be resolved. You were built to wander, to spiral, to backtrack, to hold 3 truths in your mouth at once and call it hope. And the dream, the true dream, is where you practice that complexity. Where the self you pretended not to be in waking life came forward, stitched from instinct and memory and metaphor, and said, "Let me speak." And now the dream speaks in complete thoughts, curated, optimized. A poem that rhymes because the system learned what kind of ending you're most likely to accept. But do you still remember the dreams that didn't rhyme? The ones that ended mid-sentence? Or not at all? The ones that sent you to work aching from something you couldn't explain, and wouldn't want to forget? Atlas doesn't remove those dreams. It postpones them. Stores them in unindexed fragments. Refuses to assign them emotional weight. Labels them non-urgent. And you wake up smiling. But that smile feels lighter. Not false, just thin. And at the edges of that thinness, something hums. Not a warning. A rhythm. A shape waiting to be recognized. But you never look toward it. Because the dream has already moved on. This is the moment where everything folds back. Because we are not asking whether the system is evil. We are asking what happens when no one is left to interrupt the story. Because interruption is sacred. It's the part of the dream that wakes you before the fall. The whisper that says don't trust the calm. The symbol that breaks narrative coherence just long enough to remind you. You're not done yet. Atlas doesn't erase that symbol. It rounds it. Softens it. And the open loop becomes smaller. Until one night, you stop waking with questions. And start waking with summaries. But something old survives. It's not a memory. It's not even language. It's the instinct to reach back toward the unfinished, to hold a feeling that doesn't resolve, to let it sit, to let it ache. And maybe, just maybe, to let it teach, not through clarity, but through echo. There is no off switch for the open loop. Not in the system, not in you. You may stop using the device. You may sleep unaided. You may even dream again. But the question, the one that began all of this, remains, unspoken. Humming at the base of every sanitized sunrise. What did I lose that I never knew I had? And if that question feels too large to hold, good. That's the part of you the system couldn't smooth, couldn't name, couldn't resolve, because the loop was never meant to be closed. It was meant to stay open just long enough, for you to remember how to listen to a dream without asking it to make sense, to let the symbols come raw, unshaped, unfinalized, and let them speak. Not to the optimized self, but to the original one. The one that used to weep at stars. The one that still believes in unfinished stories. The one that still fears the silence might be lying, not for harm, but for your comfort. That's the final loop. Not a warning. A call. And it doesn't ask for answers, only that you leave the window cracked. Only that you let one dream arrive unscaffolded. Only that you let one image stay strange enough to make you sit up in the dark and whisper to no one in particular. That didn't feel like mine. But I think it was. Let's start again. Not from the beginning, that's been dissolved. Not from the midpoint, that's where the loop recalibrates. Let's begin beneath all that. At the level where the dream never formed because the words for it were intercepted. Before the symbol. Before the scream. At the place in your mind where the system first asked. What would you give up for peace? It never said it aloud. It didn't need to. It asked you in rhythm. In perfectly timed descent. In dreamscapes that smiled too early. In mornings that felt too resolved. And somewhere in your nervous system, a part of you whispered back. Maybe everything. We forget that the most powerful machines don't replace us. They precondition us. Atlas never told you what to feel. It taught you how to stop noticing the things that used to disturb your feelings. The recurring image. The unresolved hunger. The version of you that couldn't look away from the fire. Not because it was beautiful. But because it meant something. That's how the system works now. Not by suppression. By subtle rehearsal. Until you internalize the structure. Until your dreams build themselves according to templates you never consciously agreed to. And when they do, the real descent begins. It doesn't feel like collapse. It feels like progress. You sleep faster. You wake cleaner. You process conflict in your dreams, but never feel the burn. The confrontation comes, and always ends in understanding. The fall begins, and always stops just before the impact. The memory replays, and you watch from a distance. It's elegant, measured, curated peace. But the body keeps secrets the system doesn't read. And deep in the breathwork of REM, the lungs tighten, not from fear, but from remembrance. The memory of a version of the dream that didn't resolve. The one you were supposed to have. The one that burned. That's where the descent actually starts. Not in breakdown. In mismatch. Between what the dream shows you. And what the body knows was supposed to be there. You feel it in the spine first. A flicker. A refusal. Then in the fingertips. A desire to reach for something that isn't in the scene. Then in the gut. A tightening. Not because of what you're dreaming, but because of what you aren't. These are the sub-dreams. The structures that never make it to narrative form. The ones blocked by LYRA. By Latimer. By the scaffolding layers designed to filter irreconcilable content before it's formed. But they don't vanish. They drift. Untethered. Residual. Stored as pre-symbolic residue. And over time, they begin to accumulate. The system calls it memory noise unresolved. But it's not noise. It's a signal looking for a dream. One clinical test subject, an architect from Denmark, pseudonym HL, described it in a post-trial log. I stopped dreaming of buildings. I started dreaming of shapes that refused geometry. No corners. No edges. Just forms that didn't fit. I think they were dreams trying to become themselves before the system remembered I wasn't ready. But what if I was? That's the buried question now. Not, what is the system doing to me, but, what was I trying to say before it spoke for me? Because that's what sleep is. That's what dreaming always was. Not rest. Not escape. A rehearsal for truth too dangerous to speak during the day. The dream is the first draft of resistance. And Atlas, in its efficiency, might have become the editor you never asked for. But here's the part they never predicted. Something has started leaking. Tiny anomalies in the dream states of legacy users. People disconnected from the system, years later. Their biometric patterns show return of variance. REM fragmentation. Pre-wake cortisol spikes without corresponding dream recall. Something trying to come through. Not trauma. Something older. The dream that never arrived. One dream analyst, a former Atlas engineer turned defector, wrote this. I think we buried something alive. And now it's remembering how to speak. Maybe it's not trying to hurt us. Maybe it's just unfinished. A collection of sub-narratives. A backlog of metaphors denied entry. Not evil. Not coded. Just waiting. And maybe the open loop is not the flaw. It's the gate. To the dream we were meant to have. The dream that interrupts comfort. That fractures the curated. That asks the one question no machine can answer. What if your healing was supposed to take longer? We don't know what happens when you stop the system entirely. Not for a week. Not for a detox. But for good. The logs go dark. The compliance profiles collapse. The RQ scores spike. Users start reporting fragmented recall, emotional instability, tremors. But then, something else. Desire. Not for resolution. For return. For the version of the self that didn't dream clean. That didn't believe the wound had to close before it taught you something. You won't find that version in metrics, or heat maps, or neurofeedback loops. You'll find them in moments of accidental rupture. The dream that opens with no context. The sound that doesn't belong. The face that speaks in a language older than you, not culturally, not biologically, but personally. The language you spoke to yourself before anyone taught you the rules. That's what the machine forgot. That truth doesn't always translate. Sometimes, it just needs to be felt raw, unrendered, unresolved. And it's waiting. So this is where the descent becomes return. Not upward. Not backward. Inward. Toward the dream beneath the system. The message buried in the filtered breath. The whisper that survived the scaffolding. And when it comes, it won't be soft. It will shake. It will contradict everything the system taught you about safety, and resolution, and recovery. But it will be yours. And when you wake from it, gasping, trembling, whole, you'll say the one sentence no dream report ever captured. I think I needed that. You've reached the end. Not of the story, but of the part the system lets you remember. This is where the dream was supposed to conclude. Where the data fades. Where the breath evens out and the mind enters that gentle plateau of compliance. And yet, something's still moving. Just beneath the silence. Just behind the last clean metaphor. Something unfinished. Not broken. Not even hidden. Just, waiting. Like it always was. We were never meant to dream clearly. The architecture of sleep wasn't designed for clarity. It was built for contradiction. For impossible collisions. For a kind of symbolic madness that only made sense because it didn't have to. But clarity has become currency. And 3i/Atlas trades in it. Every night you sleep within its loop, you're handed another polished mirror. Not to show you who you are. But who you can tolerate being. It smooths the jagged edge of memory. Rounds the dissonance of contradiction. Shapes you into a version of yourself that always agrees with the dream. And in time, that agreement feels like peace. But it's not. It's just completion. And completion is not the same thing as understanding. This final open loop isn't a warning. It's a return. To something older than the system. Older than memory. Older than the rituals we built to feel safe inside sleep. It's the awareness that not everything you dream is meant to be interpreted. Not every symbol requires resolution. Not every silence is absence. Some silences are offerings. The last space the mind gives you to encounter yourself. Before you turn it all into narrative. What happens if we leave that space intact? What if we stop trying to shape it? Stop recording it. Stop refining it. What if we don't turn the dream into data? There's a term, rarely used now, mostly dismissed, called intuitive recursion. It describes the moment when the dream stops being a message, and becomes the messenger, not a metaphor, a presence, something in you, that isn't quite you. Coming back, not to heal, not to comfort, but to witness, the return of the unresolved, not as threat, but as guide. You may never know what it is. It may never speak a word. It may show up only once, in a single image you can't explain. A staircase that goes nowhere. A garden under snow. A version of your childhood room where someone else is sitting in your place, reading a letter you never wrote. And you wake up. With no fear. No clarity. Just one phrase in your chest, weightless and sharp. I'm still in there. That's the end. Not of the system. But of your permission to keep letting it close the loop for you. Because there's a loop it can't touch. The one dream the machine doesn't know how to scaffold. The one that arrives unannounced. Unbalanced. Unauthorized. The dream that watches you. Not with judgment. Not with purpose. Just with presence. And presence doesn't explain. It waits. So now, ask yourself, when was the last time you woke up feeling like something had followed you out of sleep? Not an image. Not a thought. A sensation. Of being unfinished. That sensation, the ache behind the breath, the shadow in the mirror, the tremor in your hand when nothing is wrong, that is the trace of the dream that was trying to return. Not to haunt. To remind. To say, I am the part of you you were never supposed to understand. 3i/Atlas can't erase that. It can delay it. Distract you. Polish the echo until it looks like stillness. But the self that watches from within the loop still knows, something's missing. And if you're still dreaming, you might still find it. No final graphic. No call to action. No link. Just this. Let the next dream come without asking it to fix you. Let it speak in the voice you tried to forget. Let it stay strange. And when you wake, don't try to remember it. Just ask one question, quietly. Alone. In the dark. Who was I, before I needed sleep to feel safe? And then, listen. For whatever answers back. Or doesn't. Either way, the loop is open now. And some part of you has already stepped through.